When I was a kid, I took an interest in coin collecting. Like most kids, you worry about things like wheat pennies and silver dimes and such. But I pursued it a little further. I read up on some of the people who designed the coins, like Robert Scott, for example, the Link's first engraver in the 1790s. In 2009, the back of the Lincoln penny was redesigned to honor the 200th anniversary of the birth of our 16th president with 4 separate designs. This is my version of me meeting a rock star. This gentleman designed one of those backs. His name is Joel Iskowitz. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine.
Okay.
I'm doing fine, sir. Yourself?
I'm doing all right. Now, how did you get involved with designing coins for the U.S. Mint? You became a member of the...
I was a member of the Artistic Infusion Program,
Okay.
which began in 2003 to kind of infuse the artwork of U.S. coinage with some outside talent and creativity. And I submitted in 2005 and was accepted in 2005. And I was with the United States Mint as an AIP artist.
AIP?
AIP, Artistic Infusion Program.
Okay.
Sorry for the acronym. Until 2018.
Okay.
March of 2018. And in that period of time, I'm very proud to tell you that I designed 54 coins and medals that were minted by the United States Mint. And it's a very proud part of my resume and my art experience. But it's interesting you mentioned the Lincoln Cent of 2009, the bicentennial cent. That was a whole wonderful story in and of itself for many, many reasons.
Tell me.
Well, because it was portrayed a humble and great and iconic man on a humble and great iconic piece of currency, and it allowed me and my wife at that point in 2009, when the coins were debuted, to go down to Springfield, Illinois, which I depicted on the back of that coin. I depicted Lincoln orating, and we met a brand new minted president, President Barack Obama. Wow. In the flesh, before he spoke, on Lincoln's birthday and after. So it has a very special spot in my heart, that design. But I hope later on in your interview with me,
yes,
Stuart, that you'll ask me more about what I'm doing now and the future. Although I'm very proud of what I've done in the past, I'm like all these other artists, I want to think of what I'm doing next.
Well, at the opening, I noticed you have some pastels displayed. One actually has a famous title, Nude Ascending a Staircase.
Yes, I did a riff on the title. That title, Nude Descending a Staircase, was created by Marcel Duchamp, who's widely considered the father of modern art, and with some good reason, because he insisted that that art shouldn't conform to the standard tastes of the galleries and the salons and the critics of the time.
Sure.
And he made some very, very bold statements about art, with art, or he would be the first to tell you, well, maybe it's art and maybe it's not art. So he intrigued me for a number of reasons, because I have identified myself as a narrative artist, a figurative artist, basically a classically trained artist, and someone who embraces beauty and art with a capital A. But I have my own definition of art, that it has to have a purpose. One of the purposes is to be beautiful. And the other one that's very important to me is that it tells a story. So these pastels are my baby steps into a different world of art.
Okay.
World of art that's framed and hangs on walls and galleries and museums.
Sure.
And I just, I'm taking these little opportunities to kind of play a chess game. Duchamp famously gave up art to devote himself to chess, which he felt was the highest endeavor in which he could spend his precious time. And I figured, well, I'll be audacious and challenge Marcel to a game of chess over the period of time of 100 years. And so I'm taking some of his titles, which were puns,
Yes.
to basically send-ups of art and high-end culture, and I'm doing kind of a double take on his titles, but I'm inserting what I like to think of as valuable and might be art. That's very debatable.
Sure.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So I didn't do nude descending a staircase. I did nude ascending a staircase with a kind of futuristic time-lapse version of the figure going up the stairs in various states of transparency.
All right.
And I titled it Nude Going Up a Staircase, and there's a tradition in art when you are inspired by another artist and do a riff or interpretation of an admired artist's theme as an homage, you say after Rembrandt or after Velasquez or something. I said nude ascending a staircase before and after Monsieur Duchamp. So that somewhere in the Ethernet, somewhere in the ether, Marcel would get a kick out of that. And he'd know what I was talking about. Sure. So I'm engaging for my own amusement, really. This is minutiae that probably no one, the art world certainly at this point doesn't care about. Mm-hmm. It's my little engagement, a little intellectual swordplay with Monsieur Duchamp, who was great at that stuff.
Some would say the purpose of art is to challenge known standards or known ideas. Or at least that's what they taught me in art school.
I think they taught you correctly in saying that. I think art should challenge us. It should make us look at something in a new way. But it doesn't have to have a manifesto that says if there's anything recognizable, it's immediately lower level. Or if there's anything figurative, it's immediately something that's repetitive. No. You could reinvent the world in which you see as an individual in a very interesting and valid way. And that's what I wanted to tell Duchamp. I think it wouldn't be lost on him, by the way, that a lot of his message, some of it was not only amusing and challenging, very valid, was misinterpreted by and kind of dumbed down by the art world and by artists themselves. Or people purporting to be artists.
Oh yeah, I mean, case in point, Cubism, how that challenged known standards.
Well, it's so interesting that you say that, because that's one of my pet peeves.
Okay.
Is that, like with any revolution, political or in this case, revolutionaries in the art world, which really came in the 20th century, when artists had to really identify with a whole new set of ambient situations. The church was not the great patron any longer. They had to create a reason to do their work. And I kind of lost the thread of my thought there.
That's okay.
You have to cut that.
You mentioned challenging new ideas. For me, in the 20th century, what I thought was an interesting challenge to ideas. Go ahead.
Cubism.
Exactly.
You mentioned Cubism.
Yes.
So ironic that these rebels, and these renegades, and these free thinkers that invent abstract expressionism or cubism, not that there's anything wrong, there's been some wonderfully beautiful and valid paintings and artwork created that are in each of the schools: Cubism, Futurism, Abstract Expressionism, some beautiful things, meaningful things. But what I find objectionable is with this free new thinking, very often it devolves and gets corrupted by a brand new type of structured kind of limited thinking.
Sure.
It starts only accepting its own manifesto. And the point in case when Marcel Duchamp submitted Nude Descendu and Escalier, Nude Descending a Staircase, it was a futuristic and cubistic version, but it was futuristic in the sense that time was involved. She was coming down the staircase
Exactly.
at different times. The Cubists, who were the leading school at the time, rejected that work, and they said it's another school. It's futurism. It's too futuristic. It's not Cubism enough. And I thought, well, that's high irony. Here are these, rebels, these free thinkers, who, if you're in a different school or apply a different label, they reject it out of hand. I've had many works rejected out of hand by, brutal way.
Yeah.
Because the people who were in charge of making decisions rejected them because they were attempting to be beautiful, or they were attempting to be figurative or classic. When I say classic, I'm not talking about copying classic era or any particular school or style of art. I mean, something that's classic is beautiful in ancient Greece, as well as in 2020 anywhere in the world, because it speaks truth and beauty. To me, that's classic art.
Well, sometimes something can be ahead of its time. I mean, case in point, what I think was called the old Zephyr style of styling back in the 30s. They applied that to everything from trains to automobiles, and people just rejected it.
Yes, just on the basis of the subject matter. Only years later, when someone sees it without the contemporary prejudice and the styles that were ruling the day, the prejudice of the day, sometimes 30 years or a century later, they'd see the beautiful tonal compositions, or they'd see the forest and not just the trees.
Exactly. All right. Well, for my own curiosity, you seem to have an obsession with the original designer of the Lincoln penny, Victor David Brenner.
It's an interesting thing. There are certain things in this life, Stuart, that you and I don't have much say in. That's where the goddesses and the muses and the fates cavort and play games and amuse themselves. I have a connection with the Lincoln Cent and with Lincoln in many of my assignments, but particularly with Victor David Brenner. We both hailed from the same area of Russia, Lithuania, and he came from Russian or Lithuanian Jewish stock, so my paternal grandfather. He came to America and lived in the Lower East Side and became a medalist. He studied in France and was quite a great sculptor and medalist. And I'm not a sculptor, I'm simply a designer and a two-dimensional guy.
Sure.
But Victor David Brenner takes the place of St. Gaudens in 1909 and gets the Lincoln Cent Commission from Teddy Roosevelt. The two of them met in Oyster Bay and basically colluded. There's some collusion between an American president and this Lithuanian artist replacing St. Gaudens. And he does Lincoln's he revered Lincoln. And he puts Lincoln's portrait and breaks a precedent. Puts Lincoln's portrait on American circulating currency. And
First time American president put on an American coin.
yes, a non-allegorical figure, an actual living person.
Yeah.
Lincoln was a perfect fit because he was almost godlike.
Sure.
And he was certainly martyred in a cause in which he managed to hold the country together when it was in dire shape and threatening to fall apart.
Sure.
So there's that whole backstory, but the odd thing is that there's a photograph of Victor David Brenner with the New York Numismatic Club in Keen's Chop House, a steak restaurant, in 1909. And there's Brenner sitting with all these fellows with mustaches and mutton chops, these gentlemen coin collectors.
Yes.
And they have Brenner as an honored guest, and he actually was a member of that club. I wound up speaking at that club, the New York Numismatic Club, and I've become a member. Brenner in 1908 was commissioned to do the presidential portrait of the New York Numismatic Club president for the first presidential medal, a man named Higgins. And 100 years later, just like 100 years later, my image on the back of VDB, Victor David Brenner's image of Lincoln, on the 2009 bicentennial thing. 100 years later, they commissioned me to do the 45th president of the New York Numismatic Club. So I couldn't have made that story up, nor could have any scriptwriter in Hollywood. So Brenner's buried out in Queens somewhere. I hardly get to visit the grave sites of my own family, but one of these days I'm going to make a journey and talk to him. Just like I'm talking to Marcel Duchamp, because if I'm an artist worth my salt, I'm not going to be bound by time or borders.
Sure. Well, for me, just for my own curiosity, there's the famous VDB in the back of the 09 penny, but the VDB was removed and not brought back until 1914 under the bust of Lincoln for several years. For 5 years, his work went uncredited on Lincoln Penny. I think the Mint owes him some money.
In a sense, yes.
Yes.
Certainly many sense. But what they have paid for in a karmic way is, the Mint understandably hates to create rarities. They're not in the business of creating collector rarities.
Oh, I know.
They're not supposed to. Anyway, and they created an incredible rarity by removing his initials. Brenner himself was quite aware that it was important historically to have the initials.
Of course.
Because it's context, it's history. Knowing who created it is important, especially to a historian or a collector or a numismatist. So yes, they created a rarity. And I can identify with that too. That's a whole other story. I'm a bit of a rarity in terms of the work that I've done for the United States Mint as well. Because I'm proud to tell you, although I'm looking forward and I'm doing work for many world mints now and many people and many entities. I'm very excited about what I'm doing. I'm very proud that during those years, 2005 to 2018, was the most minted American artist ever. So I'm proud of that.
Excellent. And you also designed stamps for foreign countries too.
Yes, and I just today came back from a stamp company that I used to do a lot of work for.
Yes.
They asked me to do a series, an omnibus series for many countries on VE Day. So I just submitted work today, and many drawings of the events in Europe when Germany surrendered, and portraits of all the principals that were involved, the Allies and the Axis as well. So it was a pretty big, interesting project for me. So I continue to do that. I can't get away from certain things. Can't get away from Lincoln. Don't want to. Can't get away from history, military themes, aviation, space, and I can't get away from representational art. I like art that represents something, and I like it to represent something beautiful. I know I should be embarrassed.
Nonsense. Well, to me, you represent beauty in all its own. So, thank you very much for taking the time to come to my show. And most minted artists. So, for me, this is definitely an honor.
It's an honor for me, Stuart, that you took time out of your schedule to come to my show, or my participation in this group show. I really appreciate it, Stuart.
Well, I wish you all the best, and I wish you many more shows.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.